inviting me here today to present some of our recent projects. Hadid is a London-based architecture firm. We have about 500 architects based in London. This is actually some of us last year in Sharjah for the opening of our buildings. We actually work worldwide from our HQ in London. We deliver projects in Americas, Middle East, Southeast Asia, China, and Australia, and obviously a lot of projects in Europe, spanning across different typologies from residential, cultural, offices, and infrastructure projects. One of the things I would like to talk about today is why we design the way we do and what inspires us. And one of the interesting notions is that architecture from the Roman times to the Forbidden City in China to Chandigarh, so pretty much 3,000 years of architecture hasn't really changed much. And even modernist architecture that try to kind of break out from tradition and from traditional architectures really just replicated similar geometries and similar standard of architecture that the Romans were over 2,000 years ago. And this was a very successful model. It was a model that actually was adopted all over the world, and is a model that to a point failed to fulfill the needs of modern society. And the reason why it fails to meet the needs of modern society is because architecture cannot cope anymore with the complexity of our daily life, and buildings are starting to fail us. You can see cities around the world looking more and more similar to each other. So you don't know whether you're in London, you're in Moscow, and the usual answer from architects has been to deliver very uniquely designed buildings, i.e. icons. And unfortunately, these icons, at one point, they start to cancel each other. And you start to kind of lose the uniqueness because you have this kind of cacophony of images. And the same happens actually even here in Riyadh. And cities more and more start to look, whether you're in Asia or in Europe, they look more and more similar. And one of the few things that actually helps us kind of organize this chaos is actually natural systems, like the River Thames. And that's really what inspires us as architects. We try to kind of mold architecture using different forces, different geometries, kind of breaking away from tradition, not so much in a kind of philosophical way, but in a purely geometrical way. So we actually thinking, how do we connect buildings? How do we help people to collaborate? How do we create better public realm and landscape between our projects? How we create better facilities for the people that live in our buildings? And nature has been doing that for a very long time. So we actually went back to the drawing board and we decided to go back and study how nature does it. How nature kind of naturally from the bottom up kind of organizes very complex living systems, and how you then create something where the living systems naturally respond. So you see how trees kind of accumulate in kind of organized patterns almost without the need of an end, but actually decides how it should all look. But then you have interventions and you have models, especially in remote locations where nature and human have actually been able to collaborate successfully, or even we've been able to emphasize nature and actually getting to buildings that actually make certain hills or mountains look even more unique because there is construction there, or the coastline actually gets emphasized in synchronicity with nature. And one of the key elements for us is actually we don't just create kind of built environments, but we actually act with a living organism, which is the human species. And actually we all act, once you get big enough numbers, we all act in a kind of So we want to think, how do we actually create a better future? And the better future, if you take the automobile as an example, that's an industry that actually has evolved a lot. And in the last 10 years, the automobile, the high-performance automobile, was pretty much scrapped for the sake of a better performing automobile, which actually looks worse. And this is something that puzzles me a lot as a designer. So how do we create a better future that still looks better than the old one and not worse? So how do we actually create digital systems and design and drawing systems that actually can imitate and learn from natural geometries and natural forms? And how do we apply that at different scales, from master planning to buildings to towers and field of towers? How do we do that across different topologies of buildings, from residentials to hotels to offices, and from low-rise to high-rise? And all of that gets done here in our office in Clerkenwell in London, where we actually have a very enthusiastic team of collaborators. They all kind of individually contribute to the next generation of architectural design. We do that through the digital means, we do that through model making, we do that through internal discussions and presentations. And we actually created a series of groups that specialize in innovation, where we actually first-hand create our own tools, our own robots, our own construction machines, because industry was actually not catching up with us fast enough. And we've been doing that with concrete, we've been doing it with timber, and we actually decided to actually bring some of these robots in the office, where we can make our own molds for our concrete systems. And the next generation of design is actually moving on towards metaverse and towards spaces of collaboration where our clients and our consultants can actually physically or virtually enter the space and collaborate in a third dimension, where the clients of the future can customize their home, so can actually, through software systems, kind of decide from a kit of parts what their home will look like, and kind of create unique designs that is even different from what we anticipated in the first place. So the role of the designers becomes more the one of giving a kit of opportunities and elements, and then leaving the end user to kind of compose the world that works better for them. And some of the key elements, some of the key, let's say, design inspirations that move us and we constantly work on is the idea that vertical towers should not just be vertical, but should have some kind of volumetric articulation to respond to what happens to the inside of the tower, to respond to the structural needs of the tower and the structural forces that move them. How we can create fields through repetition and differentiation. How do we create a different system of self-similar buildings that actually coexist in a coherent ensemble? And how we touch the ground, how we create a kind of more human scale approach to large scale buildings. Connection to citywide infrastructures such as car parks and metro stations coming in directly from underneath our buildings. And obviously the internal void, it's for us a very important element of design. This becomes the true element of connectivity for the users and a true space where we actually meet the other people working in the same building or living in the same environment. And this is an example of an internal void that became a 200-meter tall atrium, where you can actually get a sense of what goes on in a tower, not just by reading the index of the lift lobby, what companies are on each floor, but you can physically see the activity levels on each level of the building. I will take you through a number of projects that we worked on throughout the years, different scales and different sectors. This is the very first project we're working on. This was a master plan we did for Singapore. It's a whole stretch of the city called One North, which had a river formation in the middle. We decided to create a kind of second nature, an artificial field where buildings are kind of deformed by forces and they are deformed by connectivity between them, and not just by kind of subdivision of the ground and plots, but more about creating physically connection between units and having a kind of overall roofscape and a facade composition and design that will make sense for such a large-scale project. We actually went back to a very similar theme 5 years ago for this project called Unicorn Island in Chengdu, where we actually had to design and build 1 million square meters worth of offices, residential hotels, for an incubator for startups in the south part of the city. And our response to the brief was to create a project that had this theme of the lips as a kind of common motif, where the lips becomes courtyards, becomes interlocking elements, becomes towers, towers fusing each other, towers kind of breaking apart and creating this kind of loops and H shape, and even ellipses creating the landscape around the island itself. And you can see how the element of the lips becomes also a three-dimensional motif on the skyline of the city and on the lake. And then again, coming down to the human scale approach and the landscape of the building. This is actually where two metro lines are crossing, right in the middle of the project. We have a huge highway crossing the side, and we decided to create a car-free zone and a kind of pedestrian connection over the main highway to facilitate a human scale approach of the project, which is taken across different areas from the interior to the exterior of the site. These are some pictures from earlier this year where you can see some of these towers actually getting completed and built. Some of the landscape being populated by trees and kind of growing in, nature retaking kind of ownership. And it's really a new model for China, where they really needed something very different in terms of what the architectural offering was, from a jungle of concrete and a kind of false idea of American modernity to a kind of human scale design, approach, and inspiration for the future generations. This is a project actually not very far from here, and it's our attempt to actually use design and geometry to solve one of the key issues of Saudi, which is the solar gain. So we were challenged by Saudi Aramco to create a kind of very sustainable project in the desert, and our response was, again, work with the courtyards, work this typology of creating very close buildings to the outer surface, and then having porosity towards the inside. These courts are kind of naturally cooler than the outdoor environment, and is where we're getting the air for ventilation in. There is also a kind of large canopy that allows us to walk between the three different parts of the buildings, and creating a pleasant environment in the harsh climate of Riyadh. And you can see how the motifs of kind of Arab architecture are kind of carrying across the project. That's the mosque. And that's another project that you probably have seen for the ones of you living in Riyadh or actually that cross towards the KFD. It was a very challenging and interesting thing for us to work on a metro station in an area where there was no public transport, because actually we had to encourage people and the population of tomorrow to actually use public transport. And we've done that through design, an idea of high refinement, high performance, and a luxurious experience for a metro station, which was quite unprecedented. So you can see how the facade actually creates this kind of oculus pattern, which is both a structural system as well, bringing natural light inside. And then this is kind of one of our design renderings for the project. And such a design really needed a lot of coordination between different parts, between the structural systems, the facade cladding, and the MEP, to make sure that the construction will not destroy the vision of the initial design. And you can see some of the initial pictures of the project nowadays looking almost completed. So this was done through enhancement of these digital models into BIM, where all the different disciplines actually had to input the design data and could coordinate their different systems, and we could check for clashes. And there were clashes, of course, but we were able to resolve them on the digital tool before actually going down to construction. And we really went down to kind of one-to-one and one-to-two details to make sure that the final quality would be flawless. This is one of the stadiums that we actually designed for the Qatari World Cup in 2022. And in this case, the design was inspired by Felucca, kind of a regional sailing boat. And we wanted to create a building that had a roof, which would be closed during the day and could be open up at night. So we're really kind of creating a lot of natural cooling of the boat. And then the theme of this sail-like roof gets carried on the facade system. And here you can see some of the interior shots of the tower with the cables that are holding up the removable roof. This is an office building we did for Sharjah a few years ago for BIA, which is the municipal waste treatment company. And Sharjah is really pushing for a kind of very low impact refuse system, and they wanted their office building to reflect that. At the same time, the office building was built very close to the refuse treatment plant in the middle of the desert. So we wanted to create something that looked as if it belonged there. So the geometries we took in place were actually borrowed for the dunes, and the dunes becomes this concrete roof, and then the glass is this kind of vertical elevations that face north. And on the inside of the building, then we have natural light. We have the ceiling that reflects diffuse light, but also extracts the heat, whereas all the ventilation is supplied from the bottom. And then we have the private office for the top management, where actually more luxurious materials and timber come into play. That's a very small building we did in Oxford, and this is an institute for Islamic Studies in St. Anthony's College in Oxford. And one of the key challenges for us here was dealing with the heritage. And the normal way you would deal with heritage would be to kind of borrow and mimic the past. And what we wanted to do instead was creating something uniquely modern, quite strong, but at the same time very respectful, with the use of stainless steel and brushed stainless steel. We're able to reflect the colors of the bricks around us and the sky, and actually creating a building that ended up getting a conservation award for its impact onto the positive impact on the student campus. You can see here how there was an old tree that we decided to keep, and how the building form really kind of wraps around nature and allows nature to come in. This is also a university building in Vienna, and is actually two elements of the campus for economic studies. And in this case, we have two volumes that interlock, and in the clash between these two volumes, we have the vertical circulation, which is as much as possible staircases, where we want to encourage students and professors to kind of come together, exchange ideas, bump into each other, and have that kind of high performance campus that the project wanted to create. Very small office building in Prague, in Czech Republic, where we actually created two volumes that face each other over the railway, and with this beautiful kind of golden geometry coming down from one of the towers. In this case, we actually were able also to design some interior spaces, such as the main entrance lobby. Moving a little bit further away from us, this is the first project the practice did in China. And it was quite a seminal project for us, because it was our first concert hall, and it was a building that actually sits over the Yangtze River. So the main inspiration and idea for us to create these two pebbles, one for the actual concerts, one is the rehearsal hall along the river. And we had to work very, very closely with the facade manufacturers to kind of deform the concrete, the granite cladding, and make it kind of follow the curves, and the same with the glass, and having these very unique elements with this kind of, again, these big cuts that bring the lighting in the main lobby, in the main entrance, and the grand staircase that comes up from the car park below. And the room itself is not anymore a kind of black box, but it's actually a very exciting space where you can roam around and look around during breaks of the shows, and at the same time it creates this kind of beautiful stellar sky over the sitting area. And this is another cultural building. In this case, it's in Seoul, in Korea. And this is quite interesting because it was a building that was very much objected by the traditional city architects. They wanted to have something much more, let's say, traditionally Korean, whereas we gave them something very alien, almost looking like an asteroid kind of planted on the site. And what was very interesting for us was actually seeing that over time this became one of the symbols of the Renaissance of the city of Seoul, and it became one of the icons of the city. So now, if you take a city map, you get the main royal palace, and you get this building, the Dongjeong Design District, as the kind of the two symbol of the city of Seoul. In this case, we work very, very closely with the aluminium manufacturers to kind of being able to bend this. And the building was so successful, it became the constant backdrop for all the fashion shows and the car advertisement in town. Coming a little bit closer to us, this is in Azerbaijan, in Baku, where the current leader wanted to create a building to kind of honor his late father, and at the same time house a library, a museum, and a theater. And what we did was create this kind of undulating landscape where you actually don't know what is the building, what is the landscape around it. And we are not distinguishing between the different parts of the building, but we actually cover in these different programmatic elements by this soft, malleable form, which is this GRC and GRP roof that kind of almost looks like it's peeling up from the ground. And then the interior kind of carries on the same, very, very similar design language, with staircases that come off the walls and handrails that come almost naturally, emerge almost naturally from the edge of the staircase. And then once we go inside the theater, we have a richer palette with timber actually adding on a greater human scale and human touch to the building geometry. This is building for Glasgow. I'm showing this because what is also very interesting is sometimes this type of projects become quite transformational. Glasgow is a city of 300,000 inhabitants, and this museum alone has 1 million visitors per year. So it has 3 times the population of Glasgow going to the museum every year. And before we built the Transport Museum, a lot of these exhibits were actually in an old museum in town, which was forgotten and hardly had any visitors, and it became a very, very successful part of the city now. This is a science fiction museum which we delivered for the city of Chengdu, always in China. And interesting enough, when we did the competition, they told us we have a World Congress in 1 year. So we only had 1 year to design and build and deliver this quite large museum building. We're talking about over 20,000 square meters of GFA, and we were able to actually work with some of our networks of metal cladding contractors to actually deliver this very incredible building, where you see here there is a large escalator that takes everyone up from the main lobby to the main room through this kind of high-tech science fiction experience to go to the main room. This is the world's biggest airport in Beijing in China, has 50 million passengers per annum. And in this case, again, we wanted to break down such a large terminal and such a daunting experience, such as a big airport. And one of the key elements for us was the design of these columns. So we decided to use natural light to guide you to the check-in gates and guide you to the departure gates. and then vice versa when you're coming back in to guide you through immigration control. So we're trying to use light and natural system in a kind of very intuitive wayfinding experience for the visitors. Landscape to take us through large CBD blocks, urban squares, and we apply the same design principles to large and small design projects. So this is, in this case, it's office towers in Shanghai, currently under construction. Very, very large residential tower in Miami. In this case, what was very interesting was to look at the before and after of local architecture in Miami after we built this project. And it was, when we built this tower, every project pretty much looked like this. And now there is some of the most exciting architecture in the US and some of the most vibrant kind of residential market in the US is here after we actually delivered the 1000 Museum Tower. So not only a very great commercial success for our client, but also for the broader city, I would say. Residential buildings in Singapore, where we did a lot of work in actually organizing a very rich landscape for the inhabitants. And closer to us, or closer to the ones of you coming from Dubai, the Melia Hotel, where this theme of the carving of the volume is applied on a kind of square box, and then the building itself, under the square box, has this tall atrium which becomes the lobby of the hotel with the common facilities for the users. And in this case, we had the opportunity to design also the interior for the hotel rooms. This is a hotel in Macau, which I completed about 4 years ago. And it's a building, it's actually built picture of the building. It's a building that again builds on this theme of the internal atrium and builds on the idea of natural light. And now we are in the lobby kind of looking up at the sky above us in one of the voids of the building. And the lift allows us to experience this sequence of spaces. So from the lift going to your room, you see what goes on different floors, from the restaurant to the pool at the very, very top of the building. And the client was quite happy. They gave us another 2,000 room hotel nearby. As I was saying earlier, these design principles, geometries get applied to different scales. So in this case, a small exhibition we did for Venice Art Biennale and the Salone del Mobile, where we actually created this room with techno called Alice, which is a pop-up office space that can be installed both outdoor and indoor. This is here installed in our office in London, created with the latest technology, borrowing for American's cap, this kind of sail-like structure holding up the roof of the system. And even smaller objects, almost like residential flower pots or seating areas, created with Italian companies for the private residential market. And in this case, a table created by kind of 3D milling with a 5-axis CNC machine, solid pieces of marble. This is very, very latest news. This is a project which is about to open in Rome. It's a new hotel right in the city center. Bit of a world premiere of what an old building in Rome will look like. And this is our latest tower built in Hong Kong, right in the central square of Hong Kong, where we actually adopted some of these ideas of creating the modularity on the facade, expressing where the mechanical floors are, creating facilities for the workers. And in this case, these are 3 towers actually connected by a large atrium, which is going to be hosting a Mandarin Oriental hotel, offices and residences. And here you can see the connectivity between the 3 towers. So I showed you a slide of this project earlier on. This is Papagayo, and it's a small residential project in the Caribbean where we actually bring our geometries in direct contact and connection with nature. So timber becomes the kind of the structure for the roof, but again, the kind of geometrical design is very, very similar. And if the building is already built, we then adapt and create this kind of facade renovation. So this is an adaptive reuse of an existing tower in Monte Carlo, where we actually added these 3 additional floors, and we just reclad the facade with a new balcony edge of facade details. So in this case, we ended up reusing the concrete of the structure of the existing tower and just insert new interiors and new facades. The same for this project in Melbourne.